Hey folks, I'm JC from One Shot Adventures, and today I'm going to review a classic Old West horror adventure, Night Train. Now, Night Train is one of the earliest adventures for Deadlands. It was written way back when in 1997, and a lot of fans of Deadlands will tell you that it's one of the game's classics. It's notorious for how lethal it is and for its epic finale. So, does Night Train still hold up after 25 years? Well, get ready for some spoilers, grab your 6-shooters and say a prayer because Night Train's coming to town and I'm going to give you some tips and tricks on how to run it like a pro. Night Train was written by John Goff, and it was part of the Dime novels series of Deadlands adventures. It came in a little 64-page book where half of its page count was dedicated to a short story that was based around the adventure's events. Or maybe the other way around, I'm not really sure. I think this is actually a pretty cool format for an adventure, especially when a game is trying to teach you about its unique setting, which back in 1997, Deadlands was still trying to do. Now, as a disclaimer, I ran this adventure with GURPS, not with the classic Deadlands system or the newer Savage Worlds version. I think most of my critique of this adventure is still going to hold regardless of what system you play it with, but systems do make differences on how adventures play out, and they might be a little different from your own experience. The good news is that I think Night Train ports really easily to lots of different game systems. You fans of Call of Cthulhu Down Darker Trails should check this out because it'd be really easy to port over to the Call of Cthulhu system. Night Train starts out with the PCs moseying on in to Barlow Station, a small railway station in the middle of nowhere in Kansas. There's not really a setup in the adventure for why the PCs are here, so you'll have to improvise a bit if you're making this a one-shot or you're starting this as the beginning of a Deadlands campaign. I made up a little backstory for my PCs where they were chased out of their hometown by some cattle rustlers and they needed to go get help. And Barlow Station was the nearest place to catch the train to the larger town of Varney Flats, which has a genuine marshal's office. Well, when the heroes arrive at Barlow Station, they strangely find that it's completely abandoned. There's no station master, no townsfolk waiting for the train, nobody at all. It's pretty weird. So before the train shows up, the PCs have some time to investigate and explore the little station. They'll soon discover that something sinister has happened here. A little investigation, and they'll find some bloodstains on the floor, some spent shells, and soon a mangled corpse of the station master in the outhouse. You know, when you're playing an Old West horror game, you really get what you deserve when you go check out the outhouse. Hey boys, anyone check the outhouse? The station master's corpse is full of little tiny holes, like he's been mangled by a swarm of rats. It's creepy stuff. I really want to stop here and emphasize, though, how important it is to give your PCs a strong main objective heading towards the next town of Varney Flats. Without an objective to kind of keep moving on, your players might think that the whole adventure is set here in Barlow Station. Even with my backstory of the hometown cattle rustlers, several of my players just wanted to stay at Barlow Station. They wanted to wait there overnight and even thought about scouting the hills nearby for suspects of who killed the station master. I was kind of worried that my players wouldn't ever want to move on to the next part of the adventure, Varney Flats, but I gently nudged them in the right direction and I reminded them that they had cattle rustlers they had to deal with fast. But if I didn't do that, the players might have lost a lot of time chasing down dead ends here at Barlow Station. So I totally recommend making sure that each of your PCs has important business in the next town over. Eventually, the PCs will hop on the train and head to Varney Flats, the bigger town that's in the area. There, they're approached by the town deputy, a young, bookish man named Nathan Parrish, and he asks the PCs to help him out right away. It seems that the town marshal, Marshal McBride, is missing. The deputy is over his head and he needs some extra muscle guarding a despicable murderer, Abner Knaggs, who's in the town jail. Abner's an awful guy, and Deputy Parrish is really worried that the uppity town mayor is going to try to hang Abner before the judge gets to town and tries him for his crimes like he should. Now, this is another part of the adventure which could feel like a red herring. After all, you can see how players might think that somehow the missing Marshall McBride was involved or even responsible for the killing at Barlow Station. I mean, you have a dead body in one location and a missing Marshall in the other. So players might just decide to stop here and go hunt after this Marshall rather than go to the jail and do what the deputy asked and guard that criminal in the middle of the night. The writer of the adventure even seemed to think that this was a real possibility, so he describes a little side quest here. There's a house not too far outside of town that has some of the Marshall's belongings there, but the place is completely deserted. The adventure implies that the Marshal was actually killed here by the night train, which I'll tell you about in a few minutes, but it's not super clear what really happened, and again, if your players feel like they need to track down any lead, they may find themselves on another wild goose chase out here in the middle of nowhere at this little house. The fix for this is pretty easy. I just tweaked this part a little bit. I just didn't make a big deal about the Marshal being gone. I didn't say like, oh man, the Marshal's missing. I just role-played the deputy as this nervous and inexperienced guy, and he was just really anxious and worried that the Marshal was running late. He was due back really soon, and he really wanted the Marshal to come back fast in case the judge came early, and the Marshal really needed to be there for that trial. So the deputy was just nervous the Marshal wasn't going to be back on time, so he decided to go find him himself. And that's why he needs the PC's help to guard Abner Naggs in the jail. This little change of just making the Marshal a little late rather than missing just really reduced the chance that the PCs would feel like they need to go out of their way and search for the Marshal. So hopefully the PCs will listen to the deputy and say, yeah, we'll help you out and go watch Abner Naggs tonight. But that night, the deputy's prediction comes true. The mayor of the town decides to bring a posse to hang Abner Naggs. Now, this is a classic Old West sort of thing, like justice is going to be put in the hands of the townsfolk. But I just didn't love the idea of my players being in the middle of a potentially really horrible event without much context. The adventure does describe Abner as a bad guy. He's like a cattle rustler and isn't super nice. But I really decided it made more sense to play this up. I made sure to roleplay Abner Naggs behind bars as this Hannibal Lecter type. He was bloodthirsty and totally irredeemable and really creepy. I think I actually even implied that he was a cannibal, which made it feel way more justified why the whole town was coming for him. Now, my PCs, they did the right thing and they pushed back on the mayor and said they'd defend Abner Naggs until the judge arrived because that was the right thing to do. It got pretty tense and a skirmish broke out, and my PCs had to fire some warning shots into the crowd to scatter the townsfolk who were coming into the jail. It was pretty cool. But just as this scene ratchets up, a whistle blows because the night train's coming to town. Now, I'll pause here to explain this a little bit. This adventure doesn't actually require much knowledge on the player or game master's part of the Deadlands universe. But let me tell you what's going on. In Deadlands, there's several railroad barons competing over territory in the West. Many of them are super into weird occult stuff, and they use that dark magic to beat out their rivals. One of those factions is called Bayou Vermilion, and they really have a thing for the undead. Bayou Vermilion knows how to create zombies and use other worse undead creatures like vampires. And they think to win the rail wars, they can use some of these creatures to beat out their rivals. But the problem with creatures like vampires is that everybody knows they fry in the sunlight. And as it turns out, in the Old West, there was sunlight all over the place. So Bayou Vermilion can't just have their vampires charge into towns on horseback. Instead, they came up with this brilliant idea. They bought an old rickety train, they blacked out its windows, and they loaded it up with hungry, feral Nosferatu vampires. Now, the train can just run up and down their rail lines and unload these Nosferatu into rival towns in the middle of the night. So that's what happened in Barlow Station, and that's what's arrived tonight in Varney Flats. So just as the PCs think that an angry mayor is the worst of their problems, vampires come charging into the night, and they're capturing folks and killing others, and they're just making all hell break loose. And once they've grabbed some townsfolk, these vampires retreat back into the night train and they take off. Now this scene works really great. It surprised the heck out of my players when some vampires just showed up and interrupted their standoff with the mayor. I have 2 tips for this vampire ambush part of the adventure. First, the town map has the marshal's office and the jail pretty close to the railroad tracks. But the problem with these things being very close to each other is that clever PCs might be able to stop the train right here before it makes its getaway. They could just damage the tracks or just jump right on the train and headshot the zombie engineer. And while my PCs didn't have any, I hear a lot of Deadlands players carry around Dynamite for just this sort of thing. But here's the thing, you really want the train to escape from Varney Flats to set up the awesome ending that's in the final part of the adventure. So just move the jail further away from the tracks. So when the night train pulls up, the PCs hear it in the distance, and then there's a moment of tension, and suddenly they're attacked at the jail by this forward force of vampires. This helps the other vampires capture lots of townsfolk and load them up on the train and then get away. My other tip here is just make sure those vampires capture as many innocent townsfolk as possible. You want that train just loaded up with like kids and whoever else the PCs made friends with when they came into town. Because what you don't want is the players to think that the way to defeat the night train and win the adventure is to just derail it in the middle of the day. But if the train is filled up with their friends and lots of innocent people, that won't be an option, and that'll really set up for the epic finale that this adventure deserves. With the night train escaping into the, night, the PCs now have to track it down and save those poor folks who are about to become vampire food. Alright, so now you get to the epic ending of this adventure, where the PCs have to catch up to the night train, board it, kill some vampires, and rescue all those poor townsfolk. Now, I actually inserted a brand new scene between that ambush in Varney Flats and the final confrontation with the night train. My PCs were too shocked and wounded to really just chase after that train right away. So they wanted to spend the night in town, patch themselves up, and set off the next day. I figured the night train was really designed for like hit and run attacks, so it was good at staying on the move, and it just felt silly to let the PCs just immediately set out, walk down the railroad tracks, and find an evil train without any effort. So to help out here, I added a wilderness encounter with a scouting party of Cherokee natives who knew about the train, and they were tracking it themselves. It hit some of their own people, and they had mostly figured out its route. So my PCs encountered these Cherokee scouts in the middle of the night. Now, none of my PCs spoke Cherokee, and that made it even cooler because there was this tense guns drawn on both sides encounter until the two bands gestured to each other until they found common understanding. The Cherokee knew where the train was and agreed to show the PCs how to cut it off. With the train in sight, the PCs now need to ride up to the train, leap onto it, fight their way inside, and rescue the townsfolk. This is like such an awesome ending. You really get everything you want from an Old West adventure when your PCs are trying to board a train and take it over. This climax is also what gives this adventure its reputation for deadliness. As written, there are 30 vampires on the train. These Nosferatu vampires can only be killed by decapitation, a stake through the heart, or sunlight. So this is going to be an ugly, ugly fight for the PCs. Like I said at the beginning of this video, I ran this adventure using GURPS, which is a system that's pretty gritty and realistic, but even playing with Savage Worlds or the classic Deadlands system, I'm not sure how PCs are going to survive this final fight without crazy luck or just brilliant tactics. Now, I want to defend myself as an old school game master and say I actually don't mind impossible odds in adventures, especially in the finale. I mean, this is a horror adventure, and I ran it as a one-shot, so if everyone went down fighting in the last few minutes of the adventure, like, hey, that's just how the Wild West works. But in the interest of player fun, I did make a few small tweaks to how this train encounter was set up. First, even though the Nosferatu are immune to most damage, I still had them suffer knockback. Now, GURPS has this rule where if you get hit by a lot of damage, you get pushed back and you might even fall down on your vampire butt. But you could tweak this in any system by just saying that enough damage stuns a vampire for a turn. This really felt right, because after all, getting hit by a Colt revolver should keep a vampire at bay for even just a few moments. Second, I repositioned the cars in the train so that the hostages were in the middle. There were vampires up front and vampires in the back, but the townsfolk were all in that middle car. This meant that if the players were clever, they could fight off vampires in one car and then figure out how to disconnect part of the train to kind of send the rest of the vampires away from the townsfolk. And don't forget that these old trains were really, really loud, so fighting in one car probably meant that enemies 2 cars away just wouldn't have a clue what was going on. Don't just rush your players with 30 vampires in a tight little train car. Then that will certainly just kill them all really fast, and your players probably won't have a lot of fun. For my game, all those small tweaks really added up and made this encounter play out great. My PCs boarded the engine and they took out the zombie engineer. While one PC tried to stop the train, the others charged into that first car and barely survived the vampire attack there. But they did manage to pull the civilians forward from the second car, and they kept the vampires in the back at bay long enough to uncouple their car. Oh, and my players were smart enough to start firing on blacked out windows of the train so that soon they had a lot of sunlight streaming in, which just kind of cut off the vampires' attack angles. I think the best part was when one of my heroes was just thrown out that shattered window by one of the vampires. He just barely made his dexterity roll and was hanging on for dear life outside the train when a flaming vampire leaped at him, and he fought it off by kicking it just as the Cherokees rode up alongside the train to help. It was like a cinematic and memorable end to this adventure. Oh, and then the best part of the adventure was when you hit the like and subscribe button, because that's really how you deal with vampires in the Old West. So that's Night Train. I actually think this adventure still holds up really well. It's a great introduction to Old West horror and Deadlands, and it just really feels like a Wild West adventure. It offers tons of opportunities for all kinds of players to feel like heroes. For the players who like investigation and role-playing, that entire first half is going to really appeal to them. And for your players who are just all about pulling out their rifles and shotguns and gunning down monsters, well, that second half is really hard to beat for sheer danger and excitement. The only real issues I had with this adventure was that there are a few red herrings at its beginning that could lead your players down some wrong paths and some dead ends. But like I pointed out, those are really easy to fix if you know about them. If you have any interest in running an Old West horror adventure, check out Night Train. And best yet, I think it's only a few bucks on DriveThruRPG, so it's not going to cost you much for several hours of great Old West action, zombie, vampire horror on rails. Until next time, I'm JC, and just remember, if you find yourself in the Old West, never ever check the outhouse.